Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and I wanted to bring you a 9.2 melee DPS PvP tier lists. How are these specializations looking now with set bonuses, with double legendaries, with this consistent patch tuning that is constantly shifting up the meta potential? Which specializations are coming on top? Which specializations are falling to the bottom now? Has there been a shift or a shake? And what specializations might interest you in picking up for competitive PvP? And this is more focused on the 3v3 ladder bracket. So starting things off, we have the Arms Warrior. This spec has been S tier plus for pretty much the entirety of Shadowlands, but in patch 9.2 got a bit of a reality check. It got knocked down a few pegs with its defensive stance being nerfed significantly, and you are most likely the primary target for a lot of teams. This does not mean that you are unviable at the moment. I still do see Arms Warrior pairing with quite a few specializations. I see it playing with Warlocks, Rep Paladins, Enhancement Shamans, sometimes Demon Hunters, and Death Knights. It still has a lot of comp variety, but you are a lot weaker. You'll feel that weakness even more so in the 2v2 bracket than the 3v3 bracket. I think having the support of your partners, especially hybrids that provide a lot of off healing to you, where you'll kind of shore up that weakness of your defensive stance now, where I'm trying to think of where I want to put it. I think because it can still couple with so many classes, that puts it onto the A tier. And it's still strong, but not in the S tier anymore, certainly, as the arm specialization, because it does have a weakness. Usually in the S tier, you're gonna have basically no weaknesses. It's gonna be all strength. And when we look at the Assassination Rogue, this specialization benefited so much from patch 9.2. Its tier sets make you do tremendous damage during your Vendetta windows. Now going Night Fae for Sepsis. Sepsis is another insanely powerful damage over time effect. And if you pair up with a priest that's running Night Fae, whether it's a Holy Priest, Disc Priest, or Shadow Priest, you'll be able to reduce the cooldown of your Vendetta by a ridiculous amount. So you'll be getting these Vendetta Sepsis windows that healers are really not prepared for or expected for, and you can run over teams with this. You still have powerful defensives like Feint. The only thing kind of as a drawback to the Assassination Rogue would likely be your mobility when in comparison to a Subtlety Rogue, but I do think that you have more comp variety options as Assassination than as Subtlety, which is why I feel more confident putting it in the S tier. When your mobility is like slightly worse than Subtlety, but you have more comp options, I think that actually puts it up to a more competitive tier. And the amount of damage that you can do on such a low cooldown is going to be extremely overwhelming for pretty much anybody in the competition right now. I think Assassination is doing fantastic. Enhancement Shaman, you still bring the same kind of strengths and weaknesses as you did before. However, now with tier sets and legendaries, you've got more sustained damage. Specifically, the Elemental Blast build is going to allow you to get these really big, chunky Elemental Blasts out. You still support well with off healing. Unfortunately, it seems like you are still restricted. I really still only see Enhancement Shaman Warrior, sometimes Fury, sometimes Arms, and because Arms Warrior got taken down a little bit, Enhance is maybe going down with that as well. But on the ladder specifically, Turbo is very powerful. You stand a really good chance against some of these wizard cleaves by just playing aggressive, trading defensive cooldowns, and staying on top of them. And we do see an increase in prevalence of things like Destruction, Warlock, and Frost Mage. So this composition can actually combat that meta pretty effectively. I think that's also contributing to why I think Assassination Rogue is so high for me, is that it can take down these targets as well. So for me, I think Enhancement Shaman is likely coming in on the A tier, although maybe towards the end because it is limited in terms of its comp viability. And then now moving forward to the Feral Druid, you're still running the same compositions as you were before. I think if anything, you might be stuck with Jungle as your kind of most competitive option, although I have seen some Warlock Feral teams. I think specifically you're kind of locked into that one option. Your damage isn't honestly that fantastic, but your healing and personal defense is probably the highest of anything in the game, because you're not going to run out of mana when you're healing with regrowth and with things like auto frenzy regen, multiple defensive cooldowns. Taking down a Feral Druid is like close to impossible. You'll almost never be the target in competitive 3v3, but your damage is kind of lackluster. But because Jungle is so powerful as a comp, like you're limited to that. You have that one comp, you're great, but as a standalone spec, you're not really flexible. I actually kind of feel safe maybe putting it a little bit lower, which seems really strange, right? Because when you think of Jungle as a 3v3 comp, Hunter, Priest, Feral, most commonly, you think like Feral's going to be this ridiculous spec, but in terms of its damage output, maybe it's down a little bit more as a standalone, especially if you're playing on the ladder or trying to pug. But if you do run Jungle, then it could easily be an S tier specialization. But as a standalone, I think you're actually maybe more inflexible than Enhance. Hey, maybe not. Maybe we have to adjust this a little bit. Maybe we put these guys down here, only because they're limited in their options is the main reason. They still bring, I'd say Enhance brings a lot more damage and healing than Feral at the moment, but not stronger in personal defense. So that's kind of the exchange between the two. And I think that kind of makes sense. They're here, they're limited on their comp options. They have strong defense and utility, stronger damage on Enhance, I think. But at the moment, the comp viability, I think, is going to be holding them back. Frost Death Knight. This specialization is benefiting greatly as well from double legendary and a little bit from its set bonuses, being able to have a Abomination's Limb doing so much damage, as well as have your Syndragosa stunning multiple targets, makes you really good when comboing with a Windwalker, a Warrior, or a Death Knight. Or Demon Hunter, sorry, and you can bring targets together, AoE them down. They really enhanced kind of the strengths of the spec at the moment, but I think it still has the same types of weaknesses that we have seen in the past, where it's like you really only seen it with melee DPS. It's not really able to branch out too much, so it's probably coming in like in the mid Bs, maybe the low Bs. I think maybe Turbo and Jungle might be a bit better. Maybe it depends on what comps you're queuing into specifically. But maybe it's towards the top because you have a few more options than these other specs to be able to play with. Like, I don't see Enhanced Demon Hunter very much. Maybe Enhanced Windwalker every once in a while. Almost never see Feral with anything other than a Hunter. So about high B tier at the moment for Frost. You're going to crush it with a ton of damage. It was really tough to make this tier list, I'm not going to lie, even as I'm like reformulating it right now in this video, because the specs are actually in a really great position. Most of the specializations have like a comp that they can play at least that's going to be very strong. The only thing really that's kind of pinning things back for me is your comp variability. Like, what other classes can you play with? Because actually, in terms of strength and weakness, they're actually kind of almost very similar with each other. Fury Warrior, this is a specialization that you're going to be playing with Ret Paladins. You're basically directly in contest with arms, with all of those cleaves. You maybe can run with a caster or two, like a fire mage or something like that. We see it Fury more often now with fire than arms. Specifically, it's kind of taken its spot. I'm somewhat debating on where I want to put arms and Fury. This is such a hard list to actually make, because I think the specs are, in fact, very close to each other. Because we see it in tournament play so much, and it does have the flexibility of playing with a cleave and playing with a mage, I think I'd actually put it slightly above arms right now in the A tier. And I'd feel comfortable there because it has options. You still have some weaknesses, like, again, just being attacked and trained down and being squishy. But we see it a lot in tournaments, taking tournament win games. I see it on the ladder, has flexibility. But the weakness, again, would be your personal defense. And now moving on to Havoc Demon Hunter. This spec does so much damage with set bonuses and double legendary. It might be the highest DPS in the game for how easy it is to get the damage out compared to things like Affliction Warlock. But directly in contest with Affliction Warlock, its damage output is absolutely through the roof, has amazing instant crowd control. Its main drawback is Rogue Mage, and Rogue Mage is very prevalent and can just run you over immediately as a Demon Hunter if Rogue Mage wasn't in the game. If it wasn't for those meddling Rogue Mages, Demon Hunters would have gotten away with it. They would have gotten away with it. But unfortunately for Rogue Mage, it's kind of holding back your potential. But you do have a lot of comp options. I see Warlock Demon Hunter. I see Boomkin Demon Hunter. I see Melee Cleaves with Demon Hunter. I think you are way more flexible than a lot of other specializations at the moment. So I would actually put you into A tier for the ladder. And I think that the reason we don't see it necessarily in tournaments is because Rogue Mage is so prevalent and can take it down. But I don't think that that means that it's not competitive. I think it is a very strong specialization at the moment with probably the highest damage output in the game. But its personal defense lacking a little bit. Now, Outlaw Rogue, this is a spec that has pretty much just permanently existed on the D tier for this entire expansion. No one has really ever tried to make it work up until this point. But now we saw it in a tournament with Thug Cleave, with Peekaboo and Jellybeans playing in it. And it actually looked pretty good. It was doing very high scoreboard damage, had a lot of control, insane personal defense. You have an honor talent that's like sting like a bee or float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, something like that. It's going to make it scale your HP up to probably over 100,000 or close to 100,000 with full gear. You basically can't be a target. And because you do such great sustained damage, if you've got a team that can survive for a long time, you can pretty much go wherever you want onto the battlefield and take people down. So I'm actually pretty comfortable throwing Outlaw maybe like in the middle of this, maybe just because it's so uncommon at the moment still. And because Assassination and Subtlety in their niches, I think, are a bit better. But the one niche that it is strong in is just personal survivability. So if you want to play a rogue spec that's just never going to die, you want to go with the Outlaw Rogue. That's going to be the best one for you, like the Brawler, which I think fits close into the fantasy with what they were aiming to have with it, with the new honor talents they brought in 9.1.5. And I think it's going to be more time, and maybe we see it rise more to the top. Like I said on this list, these specs are really close to each other, and there's still so many changes being made to the game that it is tough to kind of like distinctly say this one is so much worse than the others. I think it's comp variety that actually holds the specs back more than anything. Ret Paladin, we've seen it once or twice in the tournament, not with great results, but on the ladder, it still just runs people over with unhealable damage, especially as Necrolord Ret Paladin. So you've still got great proc windows with now you can proc Seraphim with that procs during a proc wings. Like you can just line up these burst windows that didn't exist previously, similar to how Assassination is able to perform so powerfully. But we see it countered heavily again by Rogue Mage, and Wizard Cleaves can be tough for it as well because you're pretty much only playing with Warriors. Ret Warriors, I think one of the only comps I've ever seen at the moment playing with Ret Paladin, so you're limited on comp viability, but I think your damage, your support is better than the other options in the B tier at the moment. So I'd probably put it towards the bottom of the A tier right now for the ladder. And now we have Subtlety Rogue. And Subtlety Rogue, its comp viability is kind of low. You're pretty much going to play Rogue Mage Priest, and you can't be complaining about that. It's probably the best comp in the game. Other than that, your only options are kind of Blessing of Summer, Paladin, Marksmanship Hunter, Cheese one-shot comps, which are actually really good on the ladder. I think they're underrepresented in a lot of situations with the Shadowy Duel and the Resonator and the Blessing of Summer builds. But because you have Rogue Mage and you have those cheese options, I actually think that Subtlety Rogue is probably close to the best spec in the game at the moment, just because that comp is leaps and bounds above the rest at the moment on the ladder. And with the amount of control you have in the game, you can end any match when you want to. You can get away from any situations with your conduits that increase the range of your shadow step. You can shadow step like, I don't know, I feel like it's close to like 60 yards, maybe 60 yards. So you can always get out of a fight, get into the target, isolate the thing that you want, set up the team, and it does a tremendous amount of damage. If you get a trinket from a player without using Shadowy Duel, like you're going to KO that target with a Resonator. It's a very difficult specialization to play around in my mind. And I would say that it's near the top again, but the lines here between these are pretty thin between S, A, and B. But I would say that Subtlety right now is close to the best specialization in the game. Survival Hunter doing a lot of sustained damage now as well. A little bit more comp flexibility. I'm seeing Survival Hunters with Shadow Priests and sometimes with Warriors and Rogues as well. But I think Feral Druid Hunter is likely still the main option for Survival Hunter. And I think it's going to be that Jungle Cleave specifically. I think it's probably, honestly, though, coming in at about like a mid B tier for me, the way that I'm feeling about it. I feel like it is still kind of easily exploited as a melee DPS. It has really good sustained damage with its set bonuses with its wildfire bombs, and again, that's why it's so tough to put these things. Like I really wanted to almost all put, if I could do this list the way that I wanted to, but people would complain about it, is I'd almost put all the specs on A. They're all really solid specs with at least one S tier composition option, and then from left to right, they're like best to best to worst, and it would probably be based off comp variety. And again, I think it's comp variety. Maybe it's comp variety puts it closer to the top of this or somewhere in between here. But it's not going to be as easy on the ladder out of all the melee DPS. Like if you're running a Demon Hunter Death Knight or something like that, you can just run targets over. With a Survival Hunter, you're going to have to be a little bit more coordinated. You're also a lot squishier. I think you're an easier target to kill than most melee DPS. So actually that might hold you back. I feel like Survival Hunter's survivability, ironically, is the thing that's holding back survival right now for me. But it is still competitive. You still have S tier viable options with like the Jungle Cleave. Unholy Death Knight, this spec has been getting buff after buff after buff after buff after buff. And we do see it, I think, most prevalently with Warriors, but can also be very strong with Demon Hunters and Resto Shamans to just kind of run over single target damage. It's kind of still fighting against the fact that it's been pretty much on D tier the entire expansion. So in terms of popularity and trust, I think it's going to take a little bit more time for players to get trust in this spec being strong, and then to get the popularity after the trust has been re-earned for it. And that's kind of the problem for a lot of these specs that are coming in on the B tier, at least the low end of the B tier, is that they haven't been fantastic for a long time, and it's like, I want to put my time into it. I think Unholy Death Knight, similar to the Frost Death Knight, is in a pretty close race with them. I think single target, it does a lot better than Frost, but in terms of like chaotic blast burst AoE, you're never going to compete with Frost, which is good because then they have their both unique identities and their own unique niches. I think they're both strong, and they're both strong in similar comps, but the strategies might be a bit different for them. And then Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monk, this is a tough one. This is a really tough one. Because with its set bonuses and double legendaries, you do probably some of the highest burst damage in the game. But again, you're susceptible to Rogue Mage. That you're kind of the target of that almost in all cases. But you do have a lot of flexibility. You can play with mages, you can play with melee DPS, you can play with pretty much almost any healer in the game. I feel like Windwalker might be the most flexible spec in the game right now, in terms of what classes you can play with. Like I'm thinking of like if you paired it up with almost any spec in the game, I'd say you could make it work. Like you can make Demon Hunter Windwalker work. You can make Warrior Windwalker work. Might not be as good as the other options, but you could definitely make it work. Whereas some other classes, when you pair them up, it's like, that's not going to work. So maybe I'm putting it like on the S tier, bordering high A tier, kind of close coming in this range. And this is again with full set bonuses on your character, which I know is really frustrating to get right now. Hopefully that creation catalyst is going to come out sooner than later, but it is already kind of getting to the point where it is going to be coming out. So we can craft those set bonuses, because honestly, all these specs in my mind are a blast to play. Right now, when you have the double legendaries and you have the set bonuses, like this is kind of the end of expansion bonkers time, where every spec is got like this crazy build that it can have, and I think there's builds that haven't even really been explored all of the way just yet. So you got to definitely give it a go. I would recommend jumping in when that creation catalyst comes out, so you can start crafting the tier sets and not rely purely on just RNG for getting them. But the game is still unfolding, and again, if you want to stay up to date with patch changes and things like that, make sure you hit the subscribe button, because I do bring those patch notes to you in real time here on the YouTube channel, so you don't need to go fishing through the internet to find what's going on with your spec or what specs getting buffed and nerfed. So I am very excited to see how the rest of this season unfolds, and this is kind of just my initial thoughts on these specializations. Again, the main reason I think these specs come out on the S tier is because Rogue Mage is just so strong that Subtlety, I think, is like the best spec in the game. Assassination has more flexibility than Subtlety, but I think Subtlety actually performs better in Rogue Mage over on the ladder. And it's just such an overwhelming amount of damage from Vendetta. Windwalker, because it has probably the best flexibility of any spec in the game to play with any ranged and any melee DPS and perform and still have great burst damage. Main weakness is Rogue Mage, comes in the bottom of S. These melee DPS, we see warriors pairing up with more things, some more variety than the other options. And then Demon Hunter is just doing such a high amount of damage that I think that alone is putting it into the A tier for me. And it's kind of similar for Ret Paladin, although maybe not as much damage as Demon Hunter can put out. And main things holding them back are Rogue Mage, ironically. And then these specializations kind of pair up with these. Some pair up better with ranged DPS, right? That aren't on this tier list, but their variety or potentially their trust in these specs is a little bit low. But now I think is the time to start trying them, because those set bonuses and legendaries are really giving them the potential, right? Like Unholy and Survival Outlaw have been bottom D tier, maybe not even on the list for a long time. And now it's really tough for me to like, do I say it's better than Enhanced now? I don't know if we got enough data for it just yet. But I think based on my assessments earlier in the video that I think this is a fair assessment so far. But other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I will catch you in the next one.